name is James Cook. My presentation is called Effective Conservation. My first article is the Jenkins U.S. Protected Lands Mismatch Biodiversity Priorities. And within this article, I find important key ideas, as in the small range species are the best predictor for extinction risk. They're the first metric for conservation priority. The greatest concern is amphibians and freshwater fish because their entire range is in the United States, specifically in the southeast. Also, the United States only protects 7.8% of the biodiversity of the 48 continental states. Also, endemic rich states in the southeast are mostly private land, which has very little easement efforts. Therefore, private lands are not prioritizing the most endemic rich areas of the United States. Christopher Brown is in opposition of Jenkins' article and talks about how Jenkins et al. Article scoring system have been shown repeatedly to identify priorities that are biologically ineffective and economically inefficient. Priority setting requires explicit and defensible objectives. Conservation plans should prioritize actions, not species or places. Conservation plans should consider some of the economic, political, and social constraints on actions. Decisions account for the composition of species accumulating across sites. Jenkins released an article following Brown's et al. Article in response to what he said. And what he says in the article is, most species for the buck strategy confuse the biological priorities for conservation with the obstacles that must be overcome to protect them. Prioritization based on species needing greater protection, a basic and fundamental guideline of conservation. Proposed strategy of placing cost and convenience above a species' risk of extinction. One of the articles I found that talks about conservation credits, evolution of a market-oriented approach to recovery of species of concern on private land. This article talks about some key ideas is involvement of diverse stakeholders and partners. This helps enhance trust, ensure buy-in from policymakers, agencies, and private landowners and environmental groups. Also, well-informed, multi-stakeholder science committees, which facilitates the development of biological, effective, and scientifically credible conservation mechanisms. Lastly, flexible market-driven mechanisms, which this provides incentives for landowners to protect habitat for species of concern and facilitates adaptation to different species requirements. The last article I found talks about maximizing return on investment in conservation. Some key ideas in the article were return on investment measures the increase in conservation objective per unit cost of that conservation action. Conservation action are not independent of each other and are a portfolio allocation problem, which means parcels could be connected to each other that affects the resources needed for the parcels. Decision support tool that provides where to allocate funds across many potential projects or actions. Lastly, return on investment allows to carry out sensitivity analysis where additional data is needed most. As the literature has suggested, to do conservation work effectively, we must consider money and find where we can conserve a biodiverse area for a reasonable price. Therefore, that is why I'm focused on the southeast United States because of their high biodiversity and lack of conservation. I'm specifically focused on southern Mississippi because they do have conservation in Mississippi. Conservation is on the wrong location. I wanted to know from my research question, where can conservation be done for a significant amount of land that is biodiverse, low amount of population density, and is currently lacking conservation? This slide shows the model I ran of all four categories of conservation, being amphibians, birds, mammals, and trees, to find where biodiversity is greatest with all four categories in the United States. The map then shows where biodiversity is greatest, and that biodiversity is greatest in the southeast of the United States. This slide shows the protected lands in the United States with using easement, fees, and other and unknown. Protected lands are lands that are being conserved, and as you can see, in the western United States, there's much more conservation done compared to the southeast of the United States, where most conservation is needed. This slide shows the protected lands and the biodiversity hotspots in the United States to help find where biodiversity is greatest, where conservation is currently happening. What I am showing here is that Mississippi is missing their conservation where they should be spending their money on conservation. Currently, conservation is being done significantly more in the northwestern part of the state, and conservation should be done more in the southeastern part of the state. Figure 1 shows the overall population density of Mississippi. Figure 2 shows the breakdown population density of the lowest quantile from Figure 1. In Figure 3, I show just Jefferson County of Mississippi, because that's where I will focus for where conservation can be done most. As I specified before, so I focus on Jefferson County in Mississippi. More conservation should be done with subsidies, specifically in Jefferson County. They only spend 13% and have one of the lowest population densities in the state of Mississippi. 71% of the subsidies for Jefferson County go for crop insurance, as stated by the Environmental Working Group. Also, Jefferson County was originally developed to be a cotton plantation. The rural county has struggled with a declining economy and reduced population since the mechanization of agriculture and urbanization of other areas. The county is the fourth poorest county in the United States, as stated by the Mississippi Genealogy and History Network. I focus primarily because the county is a biodiverse hotspot, does not spend as much as they should for conservation, and have a low population density to be able to conserve a significant portion of a biodiverse habitat. Also, the county has a declining economy, so being able to conserve more land should be easier since there should not be competition for the conservation of land. Future research should try to find areas like Jefferson County, Mississippi, to find land that is biodiverse, can have a lot of biodiverse land for habitat, and is also reasonably priced to be able to do conservation successfully. These are my sources that I've used, my 5 articles, and for the images, and for some of my data and references I've had throughout my slides. This slide just shows the metadata for the data that I used to do the maps. So for the public and protected lands, for the conservation where that is done in the United States, and then the biodiversity hotspots to show where it is needed most. Lastly, a nice beautiful sunset in Mississippi. See all the beautiful nature to conserve.